So yeah, the universal call to holiness is the answer to that question on discerning what the political is and how to affect the world and how to evangelize is. And it's that first, it's like look into yourself and let's live out this universal call to holiness. So could you like maybe start us off, like what is the universal call to holiness? Where do we get it from and how do we do it?
Well, okay, well, it just basically goes back to the gospel where Jesus tells his disciples, "Be ye perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." And that seems like, well, wait a minute. We can't be perfect, but it sort of misses the point that Jesus is making, which is final union with God, which is the goal of the incarnation and salvation and resurrection and ascension and all of us being adopted as sons and daughters into Christ, into the mystical body. All of it has the goal of what the Greeks call theosis or divinization. That as Athanasius said, God became human so that humans could become like God. That's
Mm.
not pantheistic or idolatrous. That's orthodoxy. And that requires sanctity. It requires, because nothing unholy can pass into God's presence, which is why that process has to begin now. Not We don't wait until we're after death. All right. The process of sanctification, the process of growing in holiness is a Christian obligation. That's what it means to be a disciple of Christ. And Christ didn't just call a few select men to lead lives of holiness. His entire messianic message was a revolution of the laity. He was taking this very exclusivist understanding of holiness that one found within Judaism, with its connection to ritual purity laws and so on, and a kind of ethnocentrism, and he was universalizing it and saying that the true heart and soul of Judaism is this universal message of the God who embraces us all. And we are all called to holiness. And then you get the recipe for that call in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 5, beginning with the Beatitudes and then on through the Sermon on the Mount. And over time, the church, in a sense, bureaucratized, professionalized, and domesticated the Sermon on the Mount by saying, now, that's kind of the path of perfection. That's the path of the evangelical counsels of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And that's primarily for monks and nuns and celibate priests. That's not for the average person. The average
Mm.
person just needs to follow the 10 commandments. It's called the way of the commandments, which is why that lay person's station in life, married state of life, the way of the commandments was thought to be an inferior state of life to those in religious orders who can lead the evangelical councils and can truly be holy. And unfortunately, this dualism did enter into the life of the church, such that by the time you get into the 20th century, the idea had crept into many quarters of Catholicism that holiness was a kind of ideal that none of us can really attain. And so it just sort of fell by the wayside. The Second Vatican Council, following theological developments in the middle 20th century, and people like Dorothy Day and Peter Morin said, no, 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 no. We're all called to holiness, as Christ showed in the Sermon on the Mount and in his entire message. And the council went on to say, specifically in the council document, Lumen Gentium, chapter 5, goes on to point out that lay people are just as capable of holiness in their own state of life as priests and nuns are in theirs. It's just in a different modality with a different set of circumstances. And this, according to the council, this universal call to holiness is then the absolute key to the renewal and the reform and the revival of the church, which had become a bit sclerotic and clericalized and moribund with a big wall built around it to hold off modernity. We need lay people on fire for the faith to go out into the world as a leaven. The primary evangelizers, therefore, of the world are going to be lay people in their station in life. And
Mm.
so, for example, if you want to know what a Christian psychology looks like, then what you need to do is to find a Christian psychologist who has pursued the path of holiness, who can then speak to the interface of those two aspects of his or her life. Likewise, what does a Christian economics look like, or a Christian sociology? In other words, all the secular disciplines. What does secular plumbing? I mean, Christian plumbing look like, or Christian, economics and so on. You need to find Christians, Catholics, pursuing the path of holiness who are actually economists and plumbers and electricians and, politicians. And they will then show you what a Christian economist looks like. And that is the message of the Second Vatican Council. Because, and you alluded to it earlier, what do you know about climate change? Well, what does Archbishop Vigano know about the COVID virus? When did certain prelates in the Catholic Church become epidemiologists? When did they become climate experts? They're not. And so all too often the church pontificates on things over which it has absolutely no magisterial authority and no particular area of expertise. And that's a form of clericalism, when the church sort of presumes to speak all the time on these various issues, absent the input from lay people who are experts in those things. Anyway, I'm sort of off on a ramble here now, but you get the gist of what I'm talking about.